QuantSpeak, expert insights from quants for quants.
Welcome to QuantSpeak, a new podcast from the CQF Institute at Fitch Learning.
Hi, I'm Dan Tudball, editor of Wilmot Magazine, and this is QuantSpeak. Welcome to the first edition of QuantSpeak for 2023. If you're anything like me, God forbid, by now you have probably post-rationalized not sticking to your New Year resolutions. One of the New Year resolutions that I made many, many years ago and has kind of become a bit of a tradition is that at the beginning of the year, I will always pick up the phone, or nowadays it's Zoom, and talk to Tony Guida. Tony Guida, our guest today, co-head of systematic macro at RAM AI. Now, the reason for that is because Tony is one of the most passionate people in quantitative finance that I know. And if there's anybody that you want to go to kind of get a glimpse of what should be in the future, what could be in the future, what ought to be in the future, and what we ought to be thinking about, it's definitely Tony Guida that you ought to be going to. What we've decided to do this year is, rather than me keeping all of the good stuff to myself, we put it all on the record and share it with the CQF Institute community. So besides that, Tony will be delivering a talk for the CQF Institute entitled Machine Learning in Systematic Futures Allocation, a model comparison using price-based features, on the 9th of February. And maybe we'll touch on some of the points that he'll be bringing up in his talk. So Tony Guida joined RAM AI in 2019 as a senior quantitative researcher and became co-head of systematic macro. His work focuses primarily on extracting market inefficiencies from different sources, from traditional fundamentals, market signals, alternative data, and machine learning. Tony started his career at Unigestion in the quantitative equity low volatility team and later became a member of the Research and Investment Committee in 2015. He moved to EDEC Risk Scientific Beta as a senior risk consultant for risk allocation and factor strategies before going to a major UK pension fund in 2016 to build the in-house systematic equity, co-managing £8 billion as a senior quant portfolio manager. Tony's a lecturer and researcher in quantitative finance and machine learning. He's the co-author and editor of Big Data and Machine Learning in Quantitative Investments and Machine Learning for Factor Investing, R and Python versions. And he is a regular contributor to Wilmot Magazine and always the person that I go to pick his brain before I get myself involved in a new year. And then I pass off all of his great ideas as my own. So welcome, Tony.
Welcome, Dan. It's a pleasure. Maybe one word before I start. Nothing that I'm about to say has been generated by ChatGPT.
This is something I'm worried about as well. It's not going to be long before I'm out of a job or the various things that I do that I say are my job.
It's a real topic. It's true.
It is true. It is true. You know, I've always thought what I want is an AI to learn me so well that it would already know what I was going to decide and do, and then just proceed and do it. You know, and I expect that that's where we're going to be probably in about 15 years' time.
Yeah, it might be the case.
Okay, let's kick off with, you've provided us with some hot topics in open for debate in the quant community. What you've sort of highlighted there for us is, one, questions about reproducibility, two, p-hacking, three, peer reviewing, and four, open sourcing knowledge versus IP. So you suggested we talk about the role of research in quant investment, asset management, and hedge funds first, but I think let's talk about the context in terms of the current debate and then flow into the role of research after that. What do you think?
Well, I think it's great, but in any case, it's super linked. Actually, the topic of how are you capable of reproducing your results, whether you're a researcher or whether you're a researcher within a quantitative asset manager or quantitative hedge fund, it's paramount. right? Because ultimately it's going to translate into strategies that is going to deliver. And in this case, if it's peak hacking, it's not going to be delivering anything out of sample, and it's going to mess up the full strategy. So that's a big problem. Again, on this voice, I'm a witness, but I share the conclusion and the statement of higher and bigger and greater mind than myself. Marcos Lopez de Prado has been one of many voices, but also Campbell Harvey has been also, if you remember the paper that was like triple dots and the cross section of asset pricing, for me, it was a shock. It was a shock because ultimately that was something that potentially you might have guessed through some of your research if you're an honest researcher, because you see that if you push too much, if you repeat the trials, if you remove something here, potentially you're going to tweak the results, right? But ultimately, to see at this scale, all those, because like, I mean, the analysis is huge, right? I think the paper is from 2016, something like that, yeah? But the analysis is huge, and it's taking big names. I mean, big research names, people that are working at the moment in top asset management in the world, right? And if you see who I meant, those people, they're much more leaning on the school from Chicago. So it was, for me, it was super fun to see that, because that was the discussion I was having with also some of my colleagues, and especially one of them, Guillaume Coqueret, who is a researcher but also a teacher that was advocating those things for years, and we were discussing those aspects, which leads at some point, and we're gonna touch upon that as well, to the use and the greater good of machine learning in those things, right? Trying to drop, because ultimately when you're p-hacking something and you're repeating, it's also some kind of a pathological aspect of yourself, right? You want to be right. And that's the opposite of science. And if you think about that, you have to think about who you are in terms of researcher, but also as a person. I don't want to sound too cheesy, but the thing is that you're gonna put some of your bias, your a priori, into your model. And that was my whole thing, right? So the beauty of statistical learning is to do the opposite, let the data speak, while put in place some nice, very scientific protocol. And you'll see that. And toward those aspects, I should name and drop a third name, which I think is also linked to this research and how to reproduce results, is Jean-Philippe Bouchot from CFM, that has been coming from statistical physics, right? And in my day-to-day at RAM, my co-PM and very, very close friend in terms of research, Philippe Hubert, is also coming from physics, right? So I think that at the moment, this is a crisis that potentially you should see also in other disciplines. I'm not saying that it's also already just the case in finance. It's also the case in other science as well. But technology made us capable of running at large scale a lot of simulation with protocols that are close to what you are seeing in statistical physics, right? Try to converge as much as possible to the law of large number. So I think that now the issue of how to reproduce the results have been paramount also by the fact that technology is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably run my life that way, really. It's really a case of I'm constantly looking for evidence to support my my unpopular opinions. That is exactly the problem. Where do you think it's going to go from within the quant finance community? Because what's interesting is that, you know, we're kind of reaching a maturation point as far as a generation of people who have come into quant finance, where machine learning and the idea of data at large scale is something that is a very different paradigm from the classical and golden age of quant finance. So it's funny, you know, you mentioned the Chicago School and all of that. It's not just a matter of how you think in terms of relational aspects of finance. It's also to do with the tools that you are used to. And one of the questions back then was the value of the PDE in comparison to now just wrangling a lot of data and working out the behavior from that. Okay, in a roundabout way, my point is we now have a generation of quant finance practitioners who have been brought in and brought up from university through into the industry without needing to be convinced of the benefits of machine learning. But what are the dangers that come out of that? Again, here we have the issue of reproducibility, p-hacking, which is the way I run my life, and what is going to happen, what's going to happen within quant finance, within the industry, to allow this new generation of people who are very familiar with the new tools and the new approaches and all of that. Where's the scientific rigor going to come from? Where's the push for that going to come from? Especially when you're talking about power is no longer the limits of your CPU are no longer the limits of what you can handle. You don't have to find shortcuts necessarily anymore to efficiently price things in time for market and all of that sort of thing. So what's that going to lead to, do you think, Tony?
That's a great question. I'm very concerned, but also involved in what we're going to leave as a legacy thing for the next generation. And I'm very happy that a lot of young people are contacting me on LinkedIn, asking me advice and stuff like that. So I've potentially every year, like 50 occasions to discuss for students out of the blue, right, on their career, what they want to do. So I would say that your points are great. That's true. They bathe, they breathe, they don't even notice what is machine learning. But I would say in their day-to-day, plus they're very excited about all the data science stuff. So now they can use those tools like very willingly without having to second thought them. So first off, it's a problem, right? It's always the same thing. So the stronger your beliefs, right, the potential to have a higher mistakes is moderately linked to that, right? So that's exactly the same thing. So basically for those generation, I would say that the structure that, because behind machine learning, we tend to forget that statistics is there, right? And statistics it's an extension of, let's say, a higher degree of mathematics. So once you get the rigors, once you get the mathematical rigors, and you did you did a lot of statistics in your life, I would say that I would change the exam, right? Since those things like ChatGPT and those codecs, which are automated coding things in machine for anything running in Python, I'm going to be potentially the main tool used by everybody. And as you said, potentially design and customize to yourself. I would dig even deeper backwards and go back to exams when you've got pen and paper and you do. I remember when I was in university, I was doing optimization, like Lagrangian optimization on copy, right? On paper with a pen. And I was great. And the best, you don't have to do like for abstract symbolic mathematic things. It could be also extremely. I will push also the younger generation to go back also in time in order to go and to borrow from Greek philosophy, because we tend also to forget that philosophy has a wisdom, but also wisdom applied to science have been there for many, many times, right? Descartes, Pythagoras, all those, whether they are Europeans, have been also lining up concepts about what are the virtues that somebody which tends to work in knowledge, because what we do is when you're a researcher, I pride myself to be a searcher of knowledge, to be a searcher of truth. When you're doing physics and you're working on earthquakes as well, you want to model this as much as possible. But ultimately, this is, if you manage to do it, this is the truth that you want to touch. So all this generation, I will sound like a little bit like a retrograde, as we say in France, right? To push towards the higher discipline, but stronger in order to really understand them, to know them by experience. And in order to do the experience, the problems, there's no new tools. And also to some extent, I don't want to sound too old. I would say I'm 44 years old. But the generation of today is also used to have think fast, and there is this like copy paste approach that, if you have to remember, did not exist for a long time, right? When I was studying, no copy paste at that time. You have to find a thing by yourself. So the culture of patience in science by doing the mathematical demonstration might be also something more, even more required for a younger generation that have access to super fast tools in order to have the real knowledge by experience, by being capable of doing it. And most above everything else, if you're not capable of explaining it, right? So doing expose, explaining verbally those things, because you cannot cheat this thing. You cannot generate like a video of yourself, not yet, at the best of my knowledge, right? So showing those things in class, right? So it tends to be like so being in class, like or virtually or physically, it's also a great thing. So more participation. So I would say that the whole educational point would adapt at some point, but the strongest axioms that are the rigor of science, but also to know the ethics of science, right? And the history of science, which is linked also to some degree of philosophy. What is time? What is random? Or all those big questions that have been asked like 3,000 years ago. It's even becoming more paramount for this generation.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a perfect point to fold into the first point. The role of research in quantitative investment, we could have gone forward with just the standard job description. But now let's fold this into the job description. Let's fold this into, where is that, Tony? The role of research in quantitative investment, given we really ought to be thinking about something beyond the four walls or the cubicle or wherever it is that we are.
I mean that quantitative research and research for quantitative asset management, but to some extent you touched on the point I'm about to say, is that there will be a collusion of discretionary versus quant, or what is quant or what is not quant, since everybody's going to use and is actually using the same tools. You can be a discretionary asset manager, but to some extent, at some point, you might be using a data set or something that has been used or created by quantitative techniques. So even if you think that you think differently, ultimately you're going to take a decision, and most of the time you will end up in the same bucket as the one that you find yourself very different from in the first place. So the role of research, when you're a researcher, you have to have a thirst for knowledge. So having research, I will say that especially now in investment, since markets are such very complex things, right? It has been for too long undermined by, it's true that this is a social science, it's not an art science, but the complexity of markets, right? The fact that we are not based on any laws, on things that even for 45 or 50 years we've been debating, but nobody agrees on that, makes it like the most exciting things, even one of the most like futile, exciting things to work and to research on, don't you think? It's so complex. And when you're a researcher, you have to be, to some extent, some kind of a misfit. You want to shake things. You have to have like the knowledge in order to meet some kind of a degree of arrogance in order to challenge things. So when you're a researcher, is to challenge things. But challenge things does not mean you have to bash things or try to find the opposite. That's something that people tend to forget as well. The beauty in science and I pride myself to have some small success like that in my career, is you find something, right? You're very happy with that. But at some point, you find something which is a generalization of your first model, right? And this is how science is based on, right? And most of the time, I think super effective at the moment, the technology aspect, I think, is that you can take higher dimension, higher kernel, right? You just take the satellite view of what you were trying to do and generalize it even further. And it's pushing me in my career the more and more towards the more abstraction of the market. and some of the point we're going to cover about networks and try to think the market as something which is way different from just like, let's say, a line. This is the securities at a date, and you've got like 500 columns which are different features and characteristics. It's good in itself, but potentially there is another layer, another point of perception, which is from the higher perspective of it. Like when you take this, like when you're doing a classification with a model called support vector machine, there is something that we teach to students is what's the point of having a higher kernel, a higher dimension. You imagine 3 balls. The first one is white, the second one is black, the third one is white. And I say, okay, you get just one line. How can you do in order to separate the black ball from the 2 other ones? It's impossible in a 2D space. But once you get in a higher dimension, this becomes possible. And I will urge people and young people to think like that. What could be the higher dimension? Something which is, I cannot see it because I'm too deep into that. Let's take a step back, higher dimension, mathematically speaking.
Yes, absolutely. How welcoming do you think potential employers, institutions, asset managers, and so on are now towards a view of research being this way rather than, what it was 20 years ago? Do you think that this is a definition of research that is more widely appreciated nowadays?
I think so. I think that that almost everything follows the law of diffusion of innovation. So you have people that find things before others, and after that, this thing becomes slightly less from the initiates, but much more mainstream. And in quantitative aspects, well, I would say that the biggest name have been created around the 90s, end of the 90s, like I don't know if I can drop names, but it's positive, so I'm guessing I can. Like the D Show, all those, the Renaissance, those people, those like legends have been created. Also the HL, I think, something like that, have been created. Even CFM in 2000 have been created end of the 90s. So they were the first one, but the first rebels in finance to some extent. But after that, and let's say 10 or 15 years after that, especially during the crisis, some of the quantitative, because quant have become, for me, mainstream, according to 2 things, especially, but the crisis of 2008 make it much more mainstream because there are the risk models, the quantitative risk aspect of things that were here because there were like pricing stuff. It was math, right? It wasn't any other choices. If you want to do even an expression of value at risk was to some extent a statistical thing to understand, like a quantitative distribution. So I would say that quant thing came from the back door, from the risk aspect of things, in the time of crisis, which tends to be something that humans as a society tends to have. In order to learn the lesson, you have to have like a slap in your face. And this become the whole thing mainstream, which led after that to the explosion of factors in itself. And research have been also following this aspect. The fact that quantitative risk have been happening and could have been prevented using quant tools, push the research, like the quantitative research, into the desks of all the banks and most of the software new company. So it become more and more adopted. So people now, and especially a company like the one I'm working at the moment, we are in all the time interns that are coming from polytechnical schools or science, data science, potentially a financial background. So I'd say that the companies are investing in this human aspect of research, and is doing valuing correctly. I think you have a lot of new roles which are head of research at the level of a company, which is driving and orchestrating different types of the research. You have been again these initiatives from some Middle Eastern sovereign fund building an army of quant super rock stars from all the world in order to reboot everything from the investment to all the action. I think it's great. I think it was impossible 20 years ago, but 20 years ago it was already impossible to have open source things on your PC at your work. You couldn't modify anything. At the moment, it has been a revolution, right? Don't you think?
Absolutely. Let's talk about peer reviewing and open source. Because besides peer review, I mean, you're talking about peer reviewing with research and so on. And regardless of whether it's published, the importance of peer review can't be denied, but obviously there's a lot of opportunity there for corruption. So let's go there.
That's great. So disclosure, I'm a reviewer, so not really anonymous, but still, for 3 different journals, which are all based finance/machine learning. And I love doing that. So when you're a peer reviewer, you see the copies of the other reviewer. From time to time, let's say like 65% of the time, you can see that the people are honest and they're down to the details and try to make the paper the best shape without shifting the direction of the paper. But 1/3 of the time, what you can tell that it's just like it becomes some kind of a religious questions, and people are shifting the paper towards another direction, which is not the proper direction of the paper. And it gives a lot of problems because it makes the whole thing well corrupted, as you said. And in an era of there's been this paper from a science, I don't remember the name, but it was great. Potentially, he was taking a step back in all the innovation of our human civilization from the last 100 years, and was saying that at the moment the research were having a very, very bad time, generally speaking, at the level of the humanity, because we were applying exponential resources in order to have just marginal linear improvements, which wasn't the case like 60 or 70 years ago, if you think about quantum stuff and mathematics. So the whole thing is that the science is in crisis. Peer reviewing is corrupted by some kind of ego or school of church. But at the end, what makes a corpus of research growing is the consensus or the dispersion of honest papers that are presented. So I'm seeing the problems. I don't have any answer to the problem because ultimately, unless you have to become a professional peer reviewing, which might be something at some point, why not? Right, on activities that's developed, but in order not to be involving your beliefs and your quarrels, the things that your crusades, right? It's the opposite of this place, right? The journals of paper and research could be an holy sanctuary, an holy temple where you put as much as you can your heart, right? And in order to make something grow, because you never know, at some point, like through the line 3 years from now, one paper that has been inspired by this paper that you did not reject because you give it a chance and you put yourself in the shoes of the writers. You did not think with your anima, your mask, your personality and yourself could change. Maybe could change the world.
Absolutely. Maybe we should start an audit committee. Maybe we should just sort of start an audit board. And it's, of course, it will be completely unbiased. And we will just audit the peer review process at all publications and all of that sort of thing. And, it will be given a certification and there will be some level of confidence about these things. But that would be an interesting way to kind of formalize the issues in a way that people can understand, from the publishing side of things, just to talk about the publishing industry. If you ask me, it's a dead man walking because the publishing industry completely lost any the justification for the end user to pay for the information and knowledge, that's no longer the model. But the model that has been adopted is to get the researchers to pay for the open distribution of their research. So, everybody would rather run to archive, say, and see the preprint version. And, I don't know how active the feedback mechanism is via archive as a platform. Certainly, we see people releasing their papers via that and aggregating responses and feedback via other social media and all of that sort of thing, and making their own adjustments. But it does seem that scientific knowledge, the distribution of scientific knowledge, is facing problems, because in the old days, it was very cut and dry. You knew that the journal was going to publish. You knew that that it was on the basis of peer review. You knew that if you wanted to have access to the information, you would pay for it. And it was very, very straightforward. But in a world where there are ideological aspects at play because of the benefits that technology now allows us, the question of who ought to pay and what does that payment entail. In the old days, in the 50s and 60s, on radio, there was the payola scandal, and basically record companies were paying for play of their latest singles and all of that sort of thing. And I feel that there is somewhat an opportunity to do that now, because you're essentially charging the researchers to publish their research in many journals' models. And it's a tough one for people to wrap their minds around. I think the idea of auditing peer review, it might seem rather draconian and it might seem rather top down, but sometimes these things are necessary.
Yeah, I do agree. It's a shame, but I do agree. Maybe one element I think we can add on what you just said, because I share 100% your view, as potentially there is still like a chance. I mean, first there are too many journals, and I can witness myself because I tried to launch one at some point, but I was younger. I was excited about something enough, and I thought
it's a game for foolish young men. Launching publications, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, at some point, it was like the excitement of something, which was a very interesting project, because again, it was a collaborative project, and I met a lot of interesting people. But I'm digressing again. The point is that potentially, what those journals could have been like staying in terms of places or in terms of the grid is to ensure the quality of the research, right? Research that could not be found elsewhere, or even much more like, let's say, the type of research that could not happen outside of the template of the journal. For instance, removing this type of IP, you take the big brain from 2 different or 3 different companies that used to be that are competitors, right? And within this framework, which is like something that everybody is like dropping the weapons, think about that. This thing could happen, and you will pay premium for that, like a super band, like a reunion of things. But it's true that you have to play with the definition and shift shape. And I agree with you. It's a tricky situation. But again, also, and I also did potentially abuse that in the past when I was slightly even younger, even more excited. You feel a urge to publish, and because you want feedback. So potentially like overflowing papers in order to have feedback about things is not the right vehicles or the right pipelines, because the fact that people are publishing so many stuff, like imagining machine learning is incredible. Like every 2 weeks, you've got a new model of embeddings type with a clever acronyms and stuff like that. It's great. They want to position themselves, but to what extent this thing is just like a marginal improvement and not really a generalization, like a big change of what has been there, to what extent the researcher has taken enough time to do a literature review, which is deep, because this is the most intense part of doing a paper. It's taking a lot of time. This is why you have an added value, which is huge, because you made the selection of what makes sense, and you spend a significant amount of time of saying, all right, this is the landscape. Those people did that. I can contrast the numbers. So my idea is setting up nicely, not really. It's improving, not improving, about that way. If not, it's just like branding yourself and showcasing whatever you want to showcase in your paper.
Exactly. I mean, that's an interesting aspect of the researcher's motivation, because yes, of course, there's a motivation to publish in order to establish yourself and to
exist,
progress with your research and exist. But the publication process, the research process, the peer review process is also an educational benefit to the researcher. It's certainly something that's going to make them grow professionally. So as a result, in this day and age where functionality is being hived off from traditional industries, and you can actually, you can just focus on one particular key function, maybe that peer review process in itself, if it is reoriented, not just under the auspices of publishing as such, but more as a service, even peer review as a service, for researchers at any stage to be able to run through a service which may not be that expensive if you have a wide enough base of peer reviewers, professional peer reviewers, as you were suggesting. It's sort of like the combination of the gig economy with making things more robust, both for the end reader, the end user, and also the researcher as well.
Agree.
Yeah. Well, since we agree on that, let's do it.
No, I was about just to add something quick one. It's that it feels nowadays that the problem is, it's if you strip the full problem to its essence, it's feedback. How can researcher can get directed, elaborated feedback in order to progress, right? So ultimately, this peer reviewing things could translate into advisory / mentoring, like directed mentoring, which is again something that you can do everywhere and anywhere. And I think that it should go this way, right?
I'll talk to Paul about it. I'll tell him it was my idea.
You should. It's your idea.
And I'll cut you completely out of it and all of that, like I do every year.
I do this for the knowledge. As long as the flow of knowledge is flowing, I'm happy.
You're a classic guy, Tony.
I am.
Let's talk about, you had a point here about the use of statistical learning in futures markets, comparison with cash equity investments. Now, is this something you're going to be touching on at the conference?
Okay, I can say, like, you tell me. Well, I'm not gonna spoil the result, because the results will speak from themselves, and it's not like a big breakthrough. The idea is, again, I'm very happy, and we know ourselves together for some time on the collaboration, and I love what you did with Wilmot and CQF and all those events. I wanted to do something which is much more educational, because I was feeling that small pieces was missing. So, and this pieces is just a base case presentation that would translate into potentially a series of short paper. I'm happy there, by the way, to do that with you, is to say, all right, you've got price data, you've got a universe of features, you want to do something which is in machine learning, you want to know what's been the generic approaches over the years in order to do this trend following aspect of systematic trend following. This is the presentation you should have a look first, before starting something, because as always, systematic CTAs have been doing very good years after a very, very long winter of results, that. And as always, people get excited. And I'm pretty sure that at some point everybody, and I'm hearing voices also from friends at different organizations, are going to start a CTA, we're going to start a trend following. Just like always, right? They take the idea of starting something right after there is an excitement in terms of zeros and dollars. And I'm afraid that those people is gonna go into the wrong directions, and I'm very concerned about the issues that have been faced in quantitative equity regarding the adoption of machine learning. First, everybody was excited. They were talking about crazy robots to steal our job. They wanted to do a copy paste from data science without taking into account the domain knowledge of financial markets and finance. So I seize this opportunity to provide something which is really that will stand on the reproducibility aspect in order for people to reproduce it. Very, very straightforward, very, very transparent. What should be the results of all the range of, let's say, sound machine learning type of model, like boosted trees, neural net, LSTMs, all those things, when you're applying the rules from the papers of the Moskovitz or Hurst, or also Baltas and Kosowski, that have been quoted 2,000 times in the literature of systematic trend following managed future. That's what I want to give to the audience.
Yeah, that's going to be well received. And also looking forward to the articles for Wilmot as well that are going to follow on from this.
There might be also potentially a series of that. If I had like infinite time, I would have loved to do like a chronological thing, explaining all the time. Because the thing which is funny sorry, I digress again, but the thing which is funny is global futures is that pretty much the number of contracts, like liquid ones, it's pretty much the same and always been the same for the last 40 years, which should strike as something weird to any researcher.
We're going to have to cut short now because we've already kind of like run on for a while, and there are so many more points that we could actually cover.
Told you.
But I'm thinking I'm just going to get Tony Guida back in middle of the year, and we'll cover those points and see whether or not what we talked about at the beginning of the year still holds.
Yeah, we have to tease and spoil a little bit the graph aspect of things, which is for me the ultimate excitement and is linked to lots of different good discoveries recently, which give a spark of hope.
Yes, absolutely. I'm in full agreement there. The question I always wanted to ask you was, where does this excitement come from in the first place? I mean, are you from a family of people who are just jumping off the walls and screaming new ideas at each other, or what? Where did it come from?
Not at all. My parents are Italian immigrants that lived in France. So as a matter of coincidence, I was born and raised in France with my older brother. My older brother so there is a degree of intellectuality, of philosophy, lots of reverence through the past, right? I was taught early on the ways of the classics. The nobility is in suffering for greater goods. The Greek and Romans gods, and what was behind it, and what was the real meaning of the Odysseus, and how strong somebody should be, and so yeah, I was in this type. But my parents were like, let's say, workers. My father was working as a head bartender in luxurious hotels in France and all his careers. And my mother was working in the clothes shops and selling clothes. So
it's a real testament to them.
It is.
That they were dealing with the real issues and gave you the ability to think about the big issues. So that is a real testament to them. And it's interesting, actually. I mean, I've noticed recently there is a great deal of interest in Stoicism. Again, a lot of young kids asking about Stoicism. Isn't that funny?
It's not. It's the perfect time for that. It makes sense. I always have the book Penser pour moi-même from Marc Aurelius, but again, Seneca, Epictetus, I can go on and on and on. And this is something also I've contaminated my friends from the team. You know what? Because ultimately, the thing which is people tend to put too much of themselves, even into short-term performance, right? Performance are not linear. They could have like J-curve. They could go down for some time in order to have hyperbolic explosion. You have to distance yourself. You have to do not put your ego into that. And this is close also to some aspect of Buddhism, but that's another story.
That is another story, absolutely. Hyperbolic explosion. That should be your slogan. Thank you very much, Tony Guida. It is always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
And you will be able to catch Tony Guida on the 9th of February for his CQF Institute talk, Machine Learning in Systematic Futures Allocation, a model comparison using price-based features. Free for Institute members. And remember, Institute membership is also free because that's the way we roll. You will also be able to see Tony on a panel at the Quant Insights Portfolio Management Conference on 23rd of March. Alongside Tony, there's going to be Dr. Alexandra Antonov, Natalie Packham, Klaus Huber, Rick Buchstaber, Thomas Barrow, Jean-Marc Mercier, Tony Guida, same name as you, Rene Yao, Dr. Jan Rosenzweig, and Randeep Gug from the CQF Institute. So make sure that you catch that. It's free for registered members and registration is free. Thanks very much, Tony. I'm looking forward to that talk that you're going to be giving, and we will definitely catch up midway through the year, hopefully on this podcast.
Pleasure, as always. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to QuantSpeak. Don't forget to subscribe and do sign up to the CQF Institute for more insights into quant finance.